Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be your moderator today. My name is Robin Scott. I'm co-founder and CEO of Apolitical, which is a global policy insights platform and network. And across the policymakers from more than 120 countries who use our platform, inequality is by far the issue that worries people most. There are, to my mind, few more important issues, and there are few, if any, groups of people better placed to shine a light on the problem and also on the solutions than our panelists here today. Now, you've read their bios, I'm not going to go through those, but just so you understand something about the people behind the titles, I wanted to share one fact about each of them that is not immediately obvious on their bio. So very quickly, going from my left, Alicia Barcena has worked as a botanist in Mayan communities in Mexico. Brooke Harrington is a trained financial manager and describes herself as having been trained in the art of how to help wealthy people hide their assets. She says everyone gets very depressed talking to her, so we're going to rely on her to be the darkest side of this conversation. Then, of course, we have Gabriela Ramos, who not on her bio is an amazing advocate for gender equality, and she mentioned as her fact that she was, or her colleagues did rather, selected as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in gender policy. I was delighted by that because it was actually a list that Apolitical put out, a peer-to-peer nominated list. Then we have Jacques Bougain, who is the director of the McKinsey Global Institute, and when he's not doing that, makes wine in South Africa, which is a country very dear to my heart, where I've spent a lot of time, and also, incidentally, one of the most unequal countries in the world. And finally, we have Branko Milanovic, who is off to a conference shortly in Moscow on equality and soccer, in which he says there's a lot of material, but even more memorably, he doesn't have a smartphone, and I haven't met an individual like that for a while. So, that's your panel. We're going to hear much more from them in a moment. Before we get into the rich detail, though, I just want to get a sense of the feeling in the room about this issue. So we're going to do a quick polling with a show of hands on inequality. 3 rapid-fire questions that we'll put to the audience and then to the panel. So the first is, how much of a challenge do you think inequality is? From 1 to 3. 1 is that it's overblown, it's something we've always had. 2 is that it's a significant problem but manageable. And 3 is that it's one of the great crises of our age and we have no idea how to deal with it. So quickly, audience, first of all, look at your fellow audience members. 1, overblown. Anyone feel that? No? 2, significant problem but manageable. Few hands, maybe 10%. And then 3, one of the great crises of our age. Yikes. Quickly from the panelists, same questions. 1, no one thinks it's overblown. 2, anyone middling? No. 3, full house on the panel, my goodness. Second question, this is about how much we actually know the solutions. Forget doing them and implementing them, this is just the knowledge. So 1, we completely understand what to do, it's all about implementation. 2, somewhat, but there are questions left unanswered. And 3, we're still basically in the dark. So from the audience again, 1, we know the solutions. There's the gentleman everyone needs to be talking to. He knows all of them. 2, somewhat, but unanswered questions. So maybe slightly more optimistic on this, maybe 20%. 3, still in the dark. Okay, there's a big contingent that supports another answer. That's interesting. On the panel, quickly, how well do we know the solutions? 1. Gabriella has all the answers. Excellent. So 2 people in this room now. Somewhat, but unanswered questions. Okay, no one on the panel thinks we're still in the dark, which is excellent. And then finally, last question, how are we doing on implementing the solutions? So 1, we're all sorted, it's just a matter of time and waiting for them to take effect. Then 2, they're bright spots, but we have a long way to go. And finally, 3, we are passive bystanders to a slow motion accident. So 1, someone put up a hand at that, she was so enthusiastic about it. Okay, so 1, we're doing pretty well. No one. 2, bright spots. Good, about 10%. And then 3, we're passive bystanders. Yikes. And then again from the panel. 1, no one's on 1. Anyone on 2? And 3? All right. So now you know something about the audience and the panelists. Now I'm going to hand over to Gabriella to set the scene and give an introduction to this issue, drawing largely on a report the OECD released yesterday, just yesterday, on inequality and inclusive growth and some solutions and recommendations. Thank you. Yeah. You have a presentation.
Yeah, I have a fast presentation, Robin, and thank you for that introduction. It was very interesting. We actually have all the answers here. No, we are presenting actually with you today. We are releasing the framework for policy action for inclusive growth. And I have to say that I completely agree with Robin. I think this is a defining issue of our time. I agree with you. It's really reaching very, very high levels of problems generated in terms of lack of social cohesion, social fragmentation, political fragmentation, and therefore it's one of the biggest challenges we are facing. The OECD has been, along with ECLAC and with many people, Branko, in the panel, measuring and assessing and putting up front the data of how inequality works. And you start, of course, with inequality of income, but then it leads to inequality of opportunities and then inequality of outcomes, and this is compounded to result in 40% of the population in our countries not making their ends meet. And I think we are talking about the most advanced economies. If you go to developing countries, of course, we find much acute problems. So I think that the fact that this panel is named the Empowering State should give us pause for reflection in terms of what we are talking about, because these outcomes are not only the result of market forces, of course they are a result of the market forces, but it's also the result of policy choices that we have taken during the last 2 decades. And we need to reflect on that, because it's not in the vacuum that these things happen. We wish to say, okay, we have been documenting inequalities for quite some time, but now the trend is improving. Well, it's not. Of course, the crisis had something to do, but it was even before the financial crisis, and the trends have not improved. We continue, every time we get into anything, the trend is just like that. You see how much low and middle classes are being left out of the equation. The wages of the top 1% earners are now 50% higher than they were 20 years ago, as opposed to only 15% of middle classes. So again, if you have a rate of growth of 50% at the top and 15% at the middle, you're never gonna catch up. Despite progress on labor market participation, for example, gender, which is one of my passions, and I see Annika Markovic here from Sweden with the feminist policy making, despite progress, we still have very great lagging figures for women. Then you go for financial and wealth distribution, and things get worse. The poorest households are heavily indebted with little or no collateral wealth, but the top 10% own 70% of financial assets. And you have it there, it's just a picture. We're just providing you with evidence. And the top 1% owns 40% of wealth. So again, not making progress. Uneven concentration of wealth locks opportunities for the generation to come. And for example, between 1950 and 1980, birth cohorts, income inequality at the same age increased by 1.5 percentage points. And so we are just confirming what families have as their own perception of the fact that their children are not going to do better than they did or as their parents did. And this is really fueling the sense of frustration and the outcomes that we're looking at the political level. So what we there is another angle of our work on inequality, which is not only about social policies, it's not only about redistribution, it's also having an impact in the way our markets work. Because the reality is that when you have such high levels of inequalities and you do not invest in the skills of the lower income groups, or you have laggard firms that are not able to take advantage of technological progress in the context of the digital revolution, what happens is that the business dynamics go down. And therefore, again, we are all wondering why productivity growth is flat in many of our economies. The fact is that might be also linked to the fact that we are not taking advantage of all the potential investment that we can do on people and firms, technology, and to ensure that everybody has a role to play. So this is the pictures, and I just wanted to present some of the pictures. What we want to say with this framework is that good evidence, and we might need more evidence, of course, but it's time for action. And that's what we are putting together, this framework that is relying on 24 indicators, and this might sound technical, but the fact is that one of the reasons why we have not been able to capture this level of inequalities and intervene more forcefully is because we're using some indicators that mask the difference. If you just go for GDP per capita, you just mask the difference. So what we're doing is let's bring together some indicators that tell us better how much growth is working for people, as the Canadian G7 is saying. And then we put together there indicators for growth and equitable sharing of the benefits. And so let's just see how much wealth distribution will improve or not, for example. We're putting equal opportunities and foundation for future prosperity, because you know that poor kids will receive poor education. So how do we ensure that one of the indicators that the OECD has developed in the PISA studies, the resilient of children that can break their link with their socioeconomic status, with their performance, how many children do we have in this in our countries? The question of inclusive and well-functioning labor markets in terms of access to the digital technology. So you have 24 indicators that we're putting together, and this is with member countries. Approve this framework, and we hope it's going to be one of the outcomes of the ministerial meeting tomorrow. So we can say, okay, take a picture now with these indicators, and we hope that we will do the policies that you need to take for them to improve, because the way they look now, if you just take that picture, is not so good. And we need to use them to complement all the other headline indicators that we use to measure the health of our economies. This is the kind of proposals that we're making. But we are also advancing very specific issues. For example, we have the percentage youth that are neither unemployment or in education. How do we do to decrease that? And we have the policies. It's not that we are blind. That's what I said. I voted for your questions because I think we have the policies. The only point is the political context that is very difficult to take the decisions that we need to take. And then we also go into the policies because, as I said, the OECD logo is better policies for better lives, and we should focus on those policies that will really help us redress these outcomes. Investing in people and places that have been left behind. How about that? Sounds pretty obvious, but it's not when you define economic policy. And I'm not talking about only social policies. I think social ministers have a lot to do, but it has to do with all the economic policies that we talk in every level and a whole of the governance view. Supporting business dynamism and inclusive labor market, as I said, not only creating jobs, but quality jobs and jobs that provide meaningful lives for people. And building efficient and responsive governments, and how do we ensure that every decision that we take have the equity considerations ex ante. Because we have been in the world of growth first, redistribute later, grow first, fix environment or the social issues later. No, let's just decide on policies that we know will have a positive impact ex ante on equity issues. This is a proposition. I hope we will make great strides going forward, but I leave it there with you, and you can all now access the policy framework for action on inclusive growth. Thank you.
Fantastic. So no doubt about the gravity, and also a lot of optimism around policies we can implement. And we want to get much more into the solutions in this discussion. But before we do, the first question to the panel is really just to perhaps challenge that assumption or question it, that we do know exactly what to do. I'm just picking up on one point Gabriela mentioned. Investing in left behind places. We've seen a few instances where a great project, there's been a great investment project, but that's actually led to the left behind people being excluded from the places one's trying to support. Now, obviously that doesn't always happen, it shouldn't always happen, but it's just by way of illustrating the complexity. So I'd like to ask the panelists, what are the knowledge gaps, if any? And are there any below-the-radar trends or confounding factors that could make solutions harder over the next few years? Maybe to start with you, Alicia.
Well, thank you very much. And I think, yes, we do have. Let me say that one of the first things I would like to share with you is what is inequality or equality? What are we talking about in the first place? And I think that we have been working on equality for the last 10 years, a decade. And we started by saying, why is time for equality different from equity? It's totally different because equality is linked to rights. It's a rights-based approach, ethically right. Okay. Now, politically, let's say that we agree on that. Politically, that means a lot because it's against something that has prevailed, at least in my region, which is the culture of privilege. The culture of privilege naturalizes or makes inequality as natural, as normal. It comes from colonialism, that hierarchies are there, that differences embedded in, that is natural, the position of privilege of those who have more access to resources, even to natural resources, to political positions, to information. And these hierarchies are also, I would say, derived into discrimination. So what we have, first of all, we have a gap on conceptualizing properly what equality means in terms of rights, politically, in relation to privileges. But thirdly, we also need to know what are the inefficiencies of inequality in economic terms. That is, our position is that equality should be seen as a driver of growth, not as a trade-off. Normally, I mean, in orthodoxy, in orthodox economy, we're seen as a natural trade-off. But we believe it's not. We believe equality is a driver. It has to be seen as a driver. Because those societies that are more equal have more productivity, more investment, and a future. So what we think we have to do then in the gaps that we have to fill, we also need to fill some critical links, and that is, if we agree that equality is not only a lack of means, a lack of opportunities, a lack of rights, a lack of recognition, etc., how do we start to fill in these gaps? So one of the things that I believe, especially talking about inefficiency in economic terms, is where do we have to intervene, politically speaking, to make sure that the future of a person is going to be more productive, is going to be more, I would say, inclusive in a way. Where and how do you need to intervene? Is what part of the life cycle of a woman, of a man, of a child, what are those that are going to be investments? Because those people, if they are emancipated in their youth, you were talking about the ninis, no? They don't study, no work, da-da-da. What happened with them when they started their life? Did they have a chance to have good nutrition, went to school? Is basic income an answer to make them feel free for innovation, if you see what I mean? So we do have some instruments there and some indicators, but now I think we have to find the critical links between what is, from our perspective, for example, inequality and productivity, inequality investment, inequality innovation, inequality, and I would say wealth, and I would say well-being rather than wealth. Because the other problem we have, at least in Latin America, we have measured inequality in terms of income, but not in terms of wealth, for example. And I was talking to our colleague. One of the problems of Latin America is that the culture of privileges, may I put one example, maybe two. One is tax evasion. $340 billion of tax evasion annually get out of Latin America because of a culture of privileges. Sorry. And you said that inequality is one of the major problems. May I put the second one? Corruption. 80% of the people in Latin America think that the government is corrupt. And 52% of people in Latin America don't want to pay tributes or taxes because they believe their taxes are going nowhere. So that's called moral, ¿cómo se llama? Moral tributaria. They don't want to pay taxes because they feel that there is no need. Where is their taxes going? No public goods are being generated. So in a way, the disenchantment of the citizens is also something that we have to bring in. But coming back to tax avoidance, I guess this is, for me, a very concrete example of privileges. Tax avoidance, illicit flows, and it's privileges at the national level, but at the international level too. Who's gaining with this tax evasion? I mean, the big companies are the ones who are really gaining with this tax evasion. And of course, BEPS is a very good initiative in OECD. It's not enough for our countries because we want the big companies to pay where they make the gains of productivity, not only in their areas of jurisdiction. But let me put you the second example, culture of privileges. If a person didn't study university and goes to Yale, the Yale, la celda, the place where they are put into the jail is a low level. If that person studied secondary or tertiary school, they are put in a special jail. You know why Lula is in a common jail? Because he didn't study. So let me stop there.
Wonderful. Well, very depressing at one level, but enlightening. And I think with the emphasis on tax evasion, we have to turn next to Brooke.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, I didn't have I was just saying with the emphasis on tax evasion in the last point, we should definitely hand over to Brooke to deepen our understanding of that.
Well, for gaps in knowledge, I would have to agree with Alicia that we need to know more about wealth inequality. In my field, in social science, the information we have on income is much more plentiful than the information we have to study on wealth. And yet, the things that concern us socially about inequality aren't so much tied to fluctuations in income. If you get a tax refund one year or a bonus another year, that's not going to change the world. But if you accumulate a lot of wealth, that will affect children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. It'll affect their educational opportunities, their labor market opportunities, their assortative mating opportunities. Wealth tends to snowball and consolidate itself. And that leads into my answer to your question about sort of what are the obstacles to having a more just and equal world. And I would propose one of the obstacles is the group of experts that I've spent the last decade studying, which are known as wealth managers. That's what I've studied to be in order to understand that world. But they're people who specialize in assisting those who are already wealthy in putting their assets offshore and making them essentially above the law so that they don't have to pay their taxes, they don't have to repay their debts to creditors, they don't have to obey laws about inheritance or splitting assets with a spouse in a divorce. Pretty much you name a law, and a wealth manager can figure out a way to get a wealthy client out of that law, including getting around trade embargoes, which wealthy people can violate and make themselves even richer in the process. So I've been working with the OECD and the tax authorities of countries like Australia and South Korea and Denmark, where I live now, to try and help them sort of work against these experts who are undermining the power of the state to make a more just and equal world.
Super, thank you. And we are going to come back to what that might look like, what the policy solution to that might look like. I think if we go next to Branko, can you comment on this?
Should I comment on your two questions? Oh, okay.
Yeah, the non-obvious trends and the gaps.
Well, let me very briefly on the gaps. I'm sure that will be a little bit boring, but we do have significant gaps, not only in terms of our knowledge about wealth inequality, where actually the gaps are the largest, but also when you come to income. And moreover, since I work on global inequality, moreover, and unfortunately, the largest gap in knowledge is coming from the most populous country in the world, which is China. So there we have really, I think, a problem. We do have data from one side or the other side, but the official data and the official survey, which has been conducted since 1982 or 1984, has never been released with microdata. So I think it is a major omission, and we work with different Chinese data, but it's really not sufficient. Similar problems exist also with India, because India has consumption and income surveys, and the two give very different results. Even exists with rich countries, with the US, and the problems are generally at the very top of the income distribution, where, of course, ideally, we would combine fiscal data with household survey data in order to actually catch those at the very top. But having said all of that, we are still very much, where it comes to the very top of the income distribution, in the dark. Now, what are the trends that we have not maybe observed or been concerned sufficiently? I would, again, from the global perspective, I would actually single out the situation in Africa for two reasons. When you look at global inequality, we have generally fairly good news that actually global inequality, because of growth in Asia, has gone down in the last probably 10 years, definitely since the early 2000s. But that actually assumes the continuation of the trends in the entire world as they were over the last 10 years. The big unknown is Africa. Africa has not been catching up with the rich world, and Africa is the continent with the largest increase in population in the next 50 years. So, you can actually have a reversal of this sort of positive trend of the decline of global inequality. Obviously, I'm not talking about individual countries. I'm talking about global inequality, which is driven also by growth of the large countries like China, India, Indonesia, and so on. There could be a reversal because of lack of convergence of Africa. And the second issue there, which is particularly important for the European audiences, is to realize that migration is not something which just happens every summer and the EU can scramble what to do. It's a long-term process which I think will be with us for another 100 years, because the income gaps between the Middle East and Europe and Africa and Europe are so large, and opportunities to increase your income by 5, 10 times are huge. And the impediments, of course, are there, but the knowledge also is there that you can actually make your life much better if you come to the rich world. So I think this is an issue that really requires joint sort of thinking and action, probably both from the OECD and from the African Union. But it's not an issue that would disappear when the weather turns cold in the fall.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jacques.
Yes. First, thanks so much for releasing the report now. It's just extremely timely, and I agree with pretty much what you have said. But 2 or 3 points. Point number one is that, again, social science are full of examples where there is Pareto rule. The top 20% always have 80% of something. If you take, corporates, a word I know very well, the top 10% of multinationals basically own 80% of GDP. So the fundamental question is exactly the point you make, which is inclusiveness and growth. I think growth is necessary, but not at the expense of somebody else, and I think the two should be watched correctly. By the way, if you look at the corporate world, we've got rules, and rules are possibly concentration index, and you name it. So again, we are pretty much lagging when we talk about, citizenship in terms of rules. But why are those rules existing? It's because it's unfair, and because obviously we don't want people to stay on the top if it's just actually an extraction of rents. So it's actually about the mobility that we need more than what you have said. And what I'm worried about is not the top 1% as so much. It's much more what is 1%, And how long can they stay in the top? Is it a rent-sinking behavior? Is it a monopoly rent behavior, or is it something else? If it's capability-driven, why not? We all know that in the US, for instance, the top 1% elite as entrepreneur obviously got so fantastically rich, but at the end of the day, they contribute so much to the growth of the economy. It's very different from somebody who inherits all the value or the wealth and basically can actually live on it. So that's my first point. Point number two, which is actually your point about what don't we know enough, and where I'm actually worried about, is the fact that with the new trends like digitization and AI, we all thought that this is going to create more opportunities. In fact, what we've seen in data is actually the opposite. The digital divide is increasing by the day, and this technology requires so much of capabilities to master that, in fact, the digital divide continues to grow, and with AI, it's likely to continue. And I think it's important not to have policies for what we observe, but policies that basically anticipate what the world will look like in a few years' time, and how do we handle that. And the second one, which I think we should recognize as well, is that beside the digital divide, I'm actually worried more for my kids than for me. And I think today one of the fundamental inequality problem is much more that the decision makers are actually my age, but the guys who are going to live with this decision are actually my kids. And today what we see in the policy setting is that the policy setting are possibly established by some people who worried possibly on their own incumbency and possibly their own standing of inequality versus the opportunity that will not come because of the decision on the teenagers. And I think it's a fundamental problem. In a report where we look at poor than parents, we came to the same conclusion. I think populations, at least in the Western world, are starting to be extremely worried about the fact that the sibling will not have the same opportunity. When you talk to the sibling, they actually go the other way around and say, it's full off, but today I'm preempted to do it simply because the policies are done by adults that basically thinks that the world is made the way they think it should be.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Just before we get on to the solutions, and I'll ask Gabriela to kick us off on that, does anyone vehemently disagree with any of the points that have been made so far?
Can I comment on the knowledge gap, because I need to fine tune, because we don't have all the answers, of course. But I think that what my colleagues have raised, and particularly this question of the impact of inequality on growth, is very important. Because we're still in the world of thinking that inequality is just a very natural outcome of growth, and actually necessary for growth if you go for competition and churning and efforts. And when we said, well, no, I think that growth is harm because you prevent poor families for investing in the skills of their kids. You have very traditional economists going out and saying, oh, your regression is no good and your variables are not good. And so, but when we put the cost of not tapping on women talents in the G20, when you build a business case, when it stops being, of course it's a moral imperative, it's an ethical imperative, but when you talk to business people with economic ministers to make the case that they're losing out of it, I think it will be important. And the second point is what we cannot measure. And that we will never do it. And that's very worrisome. Because how do you measure self-confidence in kids of very low-income families? You can give them all the education that you want. They will not make up for the social-emotional skills that you need to thrive in the digital and the world we are. Why we have invested so much in education, and the reality is that it doesn't really is the solution. It has to be quality, but you need to know what is happening. How do you measure networks, access to networks from kids that have gone through education? So all these intangibles for me are also a source of concern. And the most important intangible, that I hope that will be something we can measure, is the political economy of inequality. If you have such skewed distribution, the influence at the top to go for certain policies, that is what we are seeing, is also complex, because interaction between the economics and the politics are pretty close.
Particularly with cultural factors at work, like Alicia mentioned. Thank you so much. So I really want to leave some time for questions with the audience. So we now want to quickly go through some solutions, but I'm going to ask the panelists to try and keep these really snappy and focused on what they think is a particularly high leverage solution. And what that probably entails is something that can either be dramatically scaled, that we're seeing, or can be widely adopted in other places, because of course some stuff translates better than others. So Gabriela, maybe starting with you, seeing you've got the report and all the data, what does success look like? What is your top solution that's indicative of what the world could be?
I would go, I mean, there are many things, so you can have so many interventions, but personally, I would go for starting the sooner the better, and I will increase massively investment for early child care education and care from 0 to 3. I don't think any country has coverage at that level of the quality that we need. And actually, I would also feel a gap because we don't know what happened at that level. We have the PISA for the basic education, we have the PIAC for skills for the adults. We don't know what kind of actions are pursued there in a standardized way to help kids succeed. And the sooner, the better. So early child care education. Canada has just his child benefit. I think the Nordics have very good programs for a child. So the sooner, the better, and go and prioritize low-income kids.
Low-income kids. Fantastic. Alicia, to come back to you.
Yes, I will definitely put a lot of emphasis on the nexus between equality and efficiency, economic efficiency, and I will definitely agree with Gabi in the sense of education, but I will add something else, and that is that we have to extend education at least 12 years or 15 years. It has to be public, it has to be free, it has to be equal. Cannot be just segmented between private and public, because the public gets the worst services and the private pays for it. So I think at least 12 years. We think that even 15 years would be great if we can improve the girls, ¿cómo se dice? Kindergarten and the infancy education. But the second thing is how to build different technological capabilities from the beginning, from very early stages of life, and that is how to prepare people to absorb technical change. It's not really about absorbing information, but technical change. Prebisch used to say that education was about the capacity to absorb technical progress. So I think that has to be, and that's one of the main problems that we have. So to consider equality as a driver of growth in the front of education, in the front of capabilities in all the life cycle of a person, including the adults and the elder people, don't forget us, let's say. And of course, equality as a driver of sustainable future. Let me tell you why, and I was going to comment on one of our colleagues of the panel, because our next generation, we're also talking about inequality in terms of generational inequality. This is the first generation of humanity that has all the information about climate change, about inequality, about poverty, we have enormous amount of information. And we're probably the last generation that can do something about it. It may be too late. And our children and our grandchildren will probably be in 5 degrees, and we are aiming for 2 degrees in the Paris Accord, and maybe we're not going to get there, you know. So I think intergenerational inequality has to be seen. And finally, I would say that for us, for ECLAC, science, technology, innovation, digital economy, and technological complexity is linked to something that we call the fabric, or ¿cómo se dice? La fábrica, the main origin of inequality is the structural heterogeneity. This is big companies that have everything, access information, technology, and small and medium size, that is the big mass with informal employment. How to bridge this, how to close this gap is going to end, I think, a lot of inequalities. And my final point is really how to get into the politics, that is, the culture of privileges. How do we become more fair? The work you are doing, for example, how do we make more access? How do we make sure that the people are very disenchanted. People don't believe of anything. We were talking before the panel, who's reading our reports? Nobody. You see, no, honestly, I mean, honestly, really, I mean, come on, do you think people out there are saying, oh, I'm going to go immediately to download the OECD report or the ECLAC report? Well, I hope so, but I mean, the people outside are saying, what? My government is corrupt. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't understand what these people are talking about. The only thing I think is this is not coming to me. How do I connect my life with what these people are saying in the panel, you know? And this is where I think we have to touch the lives of people with the solutions that we're bringing to the table.
So talking of touching and making ideas concrete rather than just abstractions in reports, what on any one of the issues you mentioned, can you just give one example where a country has recently done something positive?
Yes. Oh, yes. I can put one example, two examples actually. I can put Uruguay as an example, because Uruguay did something for equality, for gender equality, that I think is more important than anything. They put together a public system for the care economy. That is for women to have the chance to go out and use their time freely, instead of having to work all day, come home and take care of the mother, the father, the children, the food, the supermarket, and whatever. No, they put together a public system where the elders, the children, and that for me is a public intervention of enormous importance, because now women have the freedom if they want to go to work or if they don't want to go to work. I mean, the freedom of using their time. And I think for gender equality, the care economy is one concrete example.
Fantastic, thank you. Brooke, did you have something to respond on?
I'd like to pick up on those last comments. Both of your comments, actually. This is my moment to put in a plug for Denmark. If you want to see a place that really does early childhood education at the highest possible level of quality, wow, it's possibly my very favorite thing about Denmark. I'm not a native Dane. Also, university is free, very high quality. You even get a stipend to go to school. So I think they're really doing it right. Come visit me, and we can have a little tour. And speaking of gender equality, I would not have been able to do the research that I did, which was this crazy ambitious thing where I not only trained to be a wealth manager, but I then trotted around to 18 countries interviewing people who hide assets for the wealthy offshore. I literally could not have done that without Denmark's subsidized early childhood education system. It was a lifesaver, and not just for me personally, but for me as a professional doing research. I'm here now because that system exists.
Fantastic. And just on your, Brooke, on your specific area of knowledge and training, what would be the solution, the policy solution to wealth held by very wealthy individuals?
The whole system depends on secrecy. In fact, Nicholas Shaxson, who wrote a very interesting book called Treasure Islands about the offshore world, says we should really call them secrecy havens rather than tax havens because of what they allow people to do, which is evade the law. So the way that you remove that privilege and that culture of privilege, or one of the most powerful ways you can do it, is blow up the secrecy from the inside. An overlooked aspect of the Panama Papers that's quite important is John Doe, the person or persons who leaked the Panama Papers data, is still an unknown. That person or persons was able to execute the largest data leak in history without revealing his or her or their identity. And still, 2 years later, we don't know who John Doe is. The journalists who broke the story for the Süddeutsche Zeitung, they don't know, and they say they probably will never know. That is a watershed moment, and it has huge implications for busting open offshore secrecy. Because what used to happen, if the names Hervé Falciani ring any bells for you, the guys who were behind LuxLeaks, the previous model was, if you want to be a whistleblower, you better be prepared to give up your livelihood and your life, basically, and take your entire family down with you. It was sort of like snitching on the mob. An example would be made of you, because the offshore industry really wanted to discourage people from doing things like this. But what John Doe showed is that you can leak and go on with your life. For all we know, John Doe is still employed in the wealth management industry. In my research, I talked to maybe a quarter of the people in my sample were really conscience-stricken. They knew that what they were doing was wrong and terrible for the world by depriving states of tax revenue that states need to provide upward mobility opportunities, to provide resources that people literally need to live. And many very smart wealth managers are torn up about this. I interviewed most of them before the Panama Papers broke. But one of the most torn up people I talked to was at Mossack Fonseca's Panama City headquarters. I may have been face to face with John Doe. I'll never know, probably. But I know that there are a lot more people out there like it who are just chomping at the bit for an opportunity to assuage their own consciences. At the same time, they're grown-ups with mortgages to pay and school fees to pay. So John Doe showed how you could have your cake and eat it too. So what I encourage governments to do all over the world, when I consult for the South Koreans or the Australians or the Danes or the Icelanders, is say, you know, polish up your PGP keys. Get your technology ready. If it were me, I would be taking out full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal and The Economist and the Financial Times saying, we welcome whistleblowers. Leak to us. Here's our PGP encryption key. We'll protect your identity, because there are people out there who will respond to that. And one leak, even a smaller one like the Paradise Papers leak of last fall, is worth perhaps 100 outside investigations.
Fantastic. Well, there's a concrete recommendation for you. Jacques, would you like to give yours? And I apologize, but I'd really love one or two questions from the audience, if we can just keep it brief.
I want to give a positive note. First of all, education, I think it's a no-brainer. The return to education has always been at the 10% to 20%. Having a return to education as big as that number means we have to dig into it. The good news is that every analysis we do on the scale of the futures tells you that there are three skills that we will need. One is creativity, another one is social interaction, and yes, indeed, we will do a bit more on the cognitive skills, but the more prominent one is actually the first two. Good luck, creativity is what defines us. We are born with it, and usually we are actually restrained not to use it. And if you look at a social interaction, it's actually where gender parity is finally going to come to age. And I think that the future is actually possibly brighter, because if we give actually the gaming side of people into the creativity, and we unleash the power of social, which is much more embedded in this part of the panel, I believe that we will have a great future and a much more inclusive growth.
Fantastic, thank you. Branko, finally, do you want to wrap us up with a fantastic idea?
Well,
no pressure.
I'm not sure that it would be that fantastic, but let me just say it will be maybe more fantastic tomorrow, because I'm going to do my book talk here, so I will not expand on this whole thing. But I would like to say that actually I fully agree with basically what everybody was saying. I think that, however, we should think of a slightly, how should I say, to put all of that in a slightly different framework. We have had, in the rich countries in particular, from 1945 to presently, actually, we have had the declines of inequality, which were, actually, you know, the market income inequality is always much higher, and then the government comes through the distribution, through transfers and taxes to reduce it. So it's basically redistributing the current cake. Now, for the reasons that I cannot now explain, I think that we have reached the limit to how much we can do there. And the change in the framework would be to work much more on endowments. One of them was already mentioned a lot. It is the endowment in human capital. So that's obvious. We have talked about that. I will not say a word about that anymore. But also it was the second one is the endowment in financial assets and capital. And it was implied in Gabriella's talk, actually. You see an incredible concentration of financial wealth. And actually, it's also what Brooks is working on. And that has not changed in the last 30 years. And we have Gini's for the rich countries that are about 90, so 0.9 for the concentration of financial wealth. And that's where I think actually taxation and what I call deconcentration of capital ownership should take place, so that the endowments could be more equal across individuals, and then the distributory role of the state can be less. So that's the essential idea, which I believe where many of these sort of proposals would come within that kind of a framework.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I really don't want us to end late, so rather than have a question from the audience, I'm going to ask for someone to give a very concrete tweet-length recommendation of something that everyone here should know about and maybe the OECD should think about doing. So does anyone want to put themselves forward for that tweet length? Gentleman over there.
Yes, we didn't talk about taxes, but taxes is my subject. So there is a tax model in the world to just go with BEPS. BEPS doesn't work. Every person who is involved in this knows it. There is a different model. It's called the GFA model, Global Family Apportionment Model. It is something like the CCCTB from the European Union. And this would work. We just need the politicians to make it. The second point for politics is we need to have the finance sector to pay for the common goods. And there is also a very easy model, and it's called a currency settlement levy. And with this model, we would help every year roundabout, it's for a day $500 million we could get with this model, and it's quite easy because there's one bank in England, it's the CLS bank, and this bank does the whole currency work in the world.
So could I ask you to summarize in a nutshell?
Yes, last sentence. So this bank, if they just put another levy of 1 point, this means 1,000%, then we would solve the problems in the world to education and to, yes.
Thank you very much. So a levy, right. We have a couple of minutes left. So
I have to say, because I'm here representing the OECD, I don't agree that the BEPS doesn't work. I think that the BEPS and the work that we are doing on tax transparency to avoid tax evasion and tax avoidance has now, just by voluntary declaration of people that forgot to pay their taxes, but now they remember they have to pay it, we have 80 billion more, and we have not just started. So transparency, all in agreement.
Okay, good. Do we have one other concrete recommendation? The lady in the blue jacket? And please keep this really tweet length. Do we have a mic?
Yes, so my question is about, can you hear me?
I can, but can you keep it very quick? Because I was actually pointing to this lady up front. So we'll go from you to her. There was a bit of confusion. Please carry on.
Okay. So I've got two questions. My question
can
about
you make
two
it
notions.
one?
Yes.
One.
About two notions. The first notion is inequality, and the second is mobility. When we talk about mobility, it means that some people go up and some people go down. And the process on the individual level of going down is extremely violent. And when you're rich, you will try, of course, everything to prevent this movement. So how can we deal about this issue and this paradox of helping people to accept to go down, or is it more about making everybody go up, which is not really possible? So what are the solutions here? What are the solutions?
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have a quick response to that?
We are going to present a social mobility publication in 1 more month, so watch this space.
I have one point, and that is we need to build a social contract. The Nordic countries did a social contract in the 40s, still remains in many ways, and I think a social contract is essential.
Fantastic, thank you. Could we get a mic, please, to
Yes,
fantastic. Last comment or question?
Yes, my name is Futim Toba from Johannesburg. Just to comment from what Jacques said, he said, why don't we know enough is that digital divide continues to grow. And I want to link it to Alicia's point that it is linked because the culture of privilege continues to grow. So the ones who were first in the market are closing it down instead of making it available for everybody.
Thank you very much. Sobering note to end on. but I'm sorry, I think we're at time now. What's been so fascinating about this discussion is how broad inequality reaches. So we've heard about culture.
I want to tell you one thing. Okay. You were talking about 3 attributes we need, and I heard a story yesterday about a boy that was very worried about making a penalty. You're going to talk about soccer, right? So his father said, no, don't worry about that. You need 3 attributes in life: altruism, courage, and fantasy. So I think this is what we need.
Well, there you go. So from culture to fantasy to some very technocratic solutions and courage, inequality needs to be looked at in the most holistic sense. But we've heard some really good concrete solutions. I think education is probably the word that comes up most and again and again. I will just leave you with one delightful intervention on inclusiveness that I think is a wonderful example of giving people a voice. The UN has been running a program in slums in Kenya and elsewhere around the world to let women and children and traditionally excluded groups have a voice in designing and reimagining where they live. And they've used Minecraft to do that. So people play games in order to express how they want the world to be. So I think actually hearing other voices and giving them a way to be heard where they're not normally heard is also important, and we're making progress on that. So please, a big round of applause to our fantastic panelists.
Do you have one? Yes. Yes, if you don't mind, we can clean the stage.
You know, my cards are in my other, but I'll send you an email. Okay. But culture, religion, you would be very, of course. Because I think you are going on what I want to touch, and that's big substance.
Nos vemos al inicio.
Oye, felicidades.
Sorry to rush you. We need to
Yeah, I know.
for the next section.
Felicitaciones.
Je vais y aller.
Oui, d'accord, je vais dire que je fais ça.
Je ne sais pas. Ouais, il faut qu'on va les bouger tous.